Is white collar crime just freelance political activity the state can't fully villainize, lest general population realize that they do it too? So I've been on a bit of a kick of watching a bunch of these American Greed and other kind of shows where there's things where someone is scamming someone. And there's something that I see within the people who are getting scammed. First of all, this just shows that it's not necessarily, it's called confidence men for some reason, the con men type of things. It's just getting your confidence in somebody. And to get the confidence in something or somebody, as we've seen with a lot of things going on right now in the pandemic and other things related to it, might have shown you that there's not too much actual evidence and analytic ability actually needed for you to have confidence in someone's claim in order for you to do something that could cost you a lot in order to have a perceived benefit in that future or that near future or whatever. So that is the general thing, I think, when it comes down with con men. And when you look at a lot of the white collar crimes, when they say the white collar jobs, talking about this, the CEOs and the C-suite, I'm going to be reading something here from Investopedia about what it actually is. But there's normally a difference between white collar crime and it is, I don't think people normally say blue collar crime, but I think the opposite of this or the other category of crime would just be things like violent crimes, just going in and just running into a place, getting a gun, like, oh, I'm going to rob this place and give me this stuff. If you do that in a bank, that is not considered white collar crime to run in there with a gun and get as much money out. But if you're in the actual bank and then you do something where you're taking out a small percentage of all the accounts, giving out loans that you know are not going to work and things like this, doing securities fraud, that would be considered white collar crime. You could take much more. You could take exponentially more, thousands, percentage wise more by doing the white collar crime. It actually affect a lot more people because when you run in there with a gun normally and you take that money out, the money that you've taken is normally insured and actually repaid back to those people. When I look at these massive scams and things like this, often when the government or the state actually ends up getting the agents in there and they actually arrest the people, they don't actually get the money back for these people, or the people who are caught in the scam. I guess you can argue it's a different situation because the people directly hand the money over to the people who are scamming them. So there's actually some kind of legalities. And whatever it is, the rules, the SEC frauds, like Securities and Exchange Commission, all these people seem to be involved. I hardly find a situation in one of these greed documentaries where the Securities and Exchange Commission or whatever state agents were supposed to secure this were just going through their regular activities and were somehow investigating and finding people. They normally would bumble across this by the con man doing something messed up where it's like, okay, that doesn't necessarily work. Because I see places like Freddie Mac and these other bigger places, in one in particular, they had some dealings with the con man and they said, okay, you're kind of shifty. We don't like what you're doing with our money here, so we're going to stop dealing with you. But they didn't send the security agents after him. They just let the person go out. They didn't even notify the public at large. So this person kept being out there and conned, I think, other people for millions of dollars more. So that's just something that I was seeing with this. And I'm kind of noticing, like, wait, these conmen seem to be using the actual process. Why has the state set up rules that allow for these conmen? Because it's legal action what they're doing. It's legal until they do. In fact, it's not even until they do something. It seems the most common way people get caught that I've seen on these shows is they're running a kind of Ponzi scheme where it's like, hey, you give us this money and then we'll give you something in the past, and this runs on them requiring more people to invest. So let's say I say from you, listener, hey, give me this $100 and then every month for the next year, I'll give you $10 a month. And then technically, that's a 20% return because you'll get $120 at the end of those 12 months, at the end of that year. So all I need to do to ensure that you get that is get somebody else to actually give me at least $20, and then I use that $20 to pay you back. Now, if I tell somebody, give me $100, and I'm using that $20 to pay you back, I could technically pocket the $80 that second person gave me because all I guaranteed you, I could have paid you back with your $100 and then the $20 I took from this other person who's paid me $100. So now I get two more people on a longer time span to give me that, and I guarantee that second person that same $100 back. Let's say I didn't pocket the money. I would need to ensure that I get another $100, but since I've already taken $20 from that second person's $100, in order to give you your interest, then I can only pay that person back with 80, and the next person who pays me 100, I'll have to take $40 out of that $100 in order to actually make the payments on that second person plus the $20 profit that I wanted, and then so forth. And the third person, to pay that third person back, if somebody gives me 100, I'm going to have to take $60 out of that person in order to pay. So it's getting to the point where if there isn't something that's actually adding value, it's actually creating something, some worth outside of the actual scheme, you're going to run out. And I think that's what you're seeing certain things like social security, where it's like, okay, where's the extra thing being gained? Where's the extra? If you just have one person coming in, if you just have the numbers, you either have to keep increasing numbers. I have to start with one person giving the money, and then two people, I use those two people to pay back that first person. Then I use four people to pay back the second two people. Then I use 8 people to pay back the third 4 people, and so on and so forth. But then in these cases, normally the first person you bring in, it's always adding, and you're reducing from the actual pool of people that you can bring into the scheme in order to actually take the money. And in some countries, I've seen this, like in the UK and the United Kingdom, they actually call some of these things schemes. I'm like, are you just coming out and admitting that those are schemes that you're doing? So it's kind of interesting how they say some of the welfare schemes and social services schemes and things like that. I'm like, yeah, it's a scheme. But scheme itself, as mentioned with the whole premise of this actual question of this shorty, is it a difference with what the white collar criminals are doing just because it's illegal? Like, a scheme in and of itself is not illegal. Yet I think in the United States of America, in American English, I think scheme normally has a negative connotation to it. Whereas in the UK, scheme is just, I think, more of a neutral word, and words are just words. So with that, I think let me just get into the reading of the actual thing from Investopedia on white-collar crime, and then I'll probably have some comments while I'm reading this. Okay. White-collar crime, laws and regulations of crime and fraud. This is by James Chen, updated on May 10th, 2020. What is white-collar crime? White-collar crime is a non-violent crime committed for financial gain. According to the FBI, a key agency that investigates these offenses, these crimes are characterized by deceit, concealment, or violation of trust. The motivation for these crimes is to obtain or avoid losing money, property, or services, or to secure a personal or business advantage. Examples of white-collar crimes include securities fraud, embezzlement, corporate fraud, and money laundering. In addition to the FBI, entities that investigate white-collar crime include the Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, the National Association of Securities Dealers, NASD, and state authorities. White-collar crime has been associated with the educated and affluent ever since the term was first coined in 1949 by sociologist Edwin Sutherland, who defined it as crime committed by a person of respectability and high social status in the course of their occupation. In the decades since, the range of white-collar crimes has vastly expanded as new technology and new financial products and arrangements have been inspired by a host of new offenses. High-profile individuals convicted of white-collar crimes in recent decades include Ivan Boesky, Bernard Ebbers, Michael Milken, and Bernie Madoff. And rampant new white-collar crimes facilitated by the internet include so-called Nigerian scams, in which fraudulent emails requested help in sending a substantial amount of money. Okay, so that's another big category as I've seen those email scams. I recently just got a new one of the Google Awards, or somebody said, "Oh, you just won this." People fall for these. And now when they're talking about the white-collar crime of this nature, there is a funny Dave Chappelle skit talking about how different people are arrested, talking about how just like a drug dealer is arrested versus someone who has committed white-collar crime, somebody who maybe has facilitated the conning or the robbing of millions and millions of dollars in Wall Street. I don't know what was the skit itself, but there was a skit talking about like this was in the white person's house, and then they go in and they shoot the dog, like shut that dog up, and then they shoot the dog and things like that. And then when it comes to the black guy, they call him and say, "Oh, when can you come in and when can you show up?" And some of these things in the actual reports, I was seeing a similar thing. Now, when it goes to these things with the Nigerian scammers, people say, "Oh, white-collar crime is just affluent white people who are treated in a different way versus the black criminals who are doing these other things." They make that statement. But when it comes to Nigerian scams, when you look at these, those are white-collar crimes. And it's also rather hard to go across border and actually get these people and get the money away from these people. There's another one with online people, many people in India, Sri Lanka, in that area, there's other channels online that go on, just individuals who just found ways to go in and reverse con these people, reverse hack these people, because these people say when a pop-up comes up on your screen and then it says, oh, you have this kind of virus, you need this help, and then you go on, you sign up, you call this line that comes up on this actual website or this pop-up, and then they find a way to get some kind of, they get you to download a certain program onto your computer that gives them control over your computer, and then they go into your bank account, or you actually give them credit information, they take things away from you. So that's one way of doing it that's more complicated, as they're talking about with these different ways that come in. That might be something to actually explain here. But those people also aren't necessarily tracked down in the same way. And one thing that I appreciate about the current time that we live in, the access to technology that we have, the people who are just out there doing the best that they can with that, is when I'm finding people actually going after these people, it's just regular individuals. It's not like it's the FBI or SEC, like what YouTube page coming up and posting these and saying this is what we're doing. It's no, these are just regular citizens that found out about this stuff and then now have gone on, and then they actually take it to the higher level where they try to contact authorities in India. And some of those authorities in India, in some cases, are in the pockets of those people. Or if they're not in the pockets of those people, they can clearly just, when they actually go to arrest these people are like, here's $100,000, or here's $10,000, which is more than you make in a year. Don't arrest us. Let us just move this location, do it somewhere else. What are they going to do? What do you think? You think that Indian policeman who's never actually heard about these Americans getting scammed is going to be like, oh yeah, because for the greater good of humanity? No, that's not going to happen. Okay, so corporate fraud. Here we go. Back to the reading. Some definitions of white-collar crime consider only offenses undertaken by an individual to benefit themselves, but the FBI, for one, defines these crimes as including large-scale fraud perpetrated by many throughout a corporate or government institution. In fact, the agency names corporate crime as among its highest enforcement priorities. That's because it not only brings significant financial losses to investors, but has the potential to cause immeasurable damage to the U.S. economy and investor confidence. So, with that, I think that's very important. I think this is part of why the government does not, or the state people do not necessarily cover these things as much. They seem to hush some of these things a bit, not just because they do some legal forms of this, as you'll see later, and as they mentioned here, it's both corporate and government institutions when this is done. There's certain accepted versions of it, but they don't want these things discussed. Because a key part of any state's power is the confidence that people have in its actual currency, in its actual ability to secure currency and give out money, especially now that you have all these fiat currencies and these central banks and things like that, where if people don't have confidence in that dollar, in the ability of actually that dollar having worth, then that's a big issue for the state and everything related to it. Okay, back to the reading. Falsification of financial information. The majority of corporate fraud cases involve accounting schemes that are conceived to deceive investors, auditors, and analysts about the true financial condition of a corporation or business entity. Such cases typically involve manipulating financial data, the share price, or other valuation measurements to make the financial performance of the business appear better than it actually is. For instance, Credit Suisse pleaded guilty in 2014 to helping U.S. citizens avoid paying taxes by hiding income from the Internal Revenue Service. The bank agreed to pay penalties of $2.6 billion. Also in 2014, Bank of America acknowledged it sold billions in mortgage-backed securities, MBS, tied to properties with inflated values. These loans, which did not have proper collateral, were among the types of financial misdeeds that led to the financial crash of 2008. Bank of America agreed to pay $16.65 billion in damages and admit to its wrongdoing. Okay, so yeah, the financial crash of 2008. So there's many things, and as I mentioned before, there was rules and laws, and why weren't they people actually looking into this? When people say, oh, we need the state to have more influence in looking into this thing that's wrong, you have the defund the police type of thing here, but then now you have people, oh, we need actual healthcare. We need actual centralized healthcare. Oh, defund the police because they're not good at those things. Oh, we need to actually fund the schools more. What makes you think the state itself has the ability to do these things well? I mean, the FDA, this FDA is a Food and Drug Administration, the ones that deals with like the food and things like that. Look at what they put up in the food pyramid. They were trying to help people, but that food pyramid had been turned out to be, hey, maybe that's actually part of why there's an obesity epidemic going on in the United States of America. When you're looking at the pandemic, what makes you think central state agencies are going to be the best ones to actually get the information about this and find solutions? What makes you think the SEC and the other people set up to do this have actual ability to actually set rules and things that would prevent things like these securities frauds and things like that happening? So yes, these individuals and these institutions did play a part in the financial crash of 2008, but also the people who were supposed to protect us from this were not able to protect public at large from this. So that's one of the issues I have with these things. I just don't think the state, the way it's organized, the bureaucracy, and the lack of actual competition is an institution that is worth trusting to be able to handle these things in the best possible way that we have with the abilities that we have available. As I mentioned before, you just got some people going online with their YouTube channels and doing more to prevent, I think, regular Americans or regular people being actually, because it's also done in Europe and things like that. These people go on and find better ways to prevent these scammers and actually go to Jamaica, go to Nigeria, go to India sometimes and fly drones and actually meet with these people like, are you the scammers? They've gone into that kind of in-depth thing and these are just regular individuals doing this. So one of my objections to this is people think that things are secured. Oh, the SEC has this. Oh, the state is going to secure this. When in actuality, it's not being secured. So that need, that wanted drive for them to actually have things be secured in better ways seems to be taken care of, and then it drops more of their defense down, I think. Okay, back to the reading. Self-dealing. Corporate fraud also encompasses cases in which one or more employees of a company act to enrich themselves at the expense of investors or other parties. Self-dealing is when a fiduciary acts in their own interest in a transaction rather than in the best interest of their clients. It represents a conflict of interests and an illegal act and can lead to litigation, penalties, and termination of employment for those who commit it. Self-dealing may take many forms, but generally involves an individual benefiting or attempting to benefit from a transaction that is being executed on a behalf of another party. For example, front-running is when a broker or other market actor enters into a trade because they have foreknowledge of a big, non-publicized transaction that will influence the price of an asset, resulting in a likely financial gain for the broker. It also occurs when a broker or analyst buys or sells shares for their account ahead of their firm's buy or sell recommendations to clients. Most notorious are insider trading cases, in which individuals act upon or divulge to others information that isn't yet public, and is likely to affect share price and other company valuations once it's known. Insider trading is illegal when it involves buying or selling securities based on material, non-public information, which gives that person an unfair advantage to profit. It does not matter how the material, non-public information was received or if the person is employed by the company. For example, suppose someone learns about non-public material information from a family member and shares it with a friend. If the friend uses this insider information to profit in the stock market, then all three of these people involved could be persecuted. Other trading-related offenses include fraud in connection with mutual hedge funds, including late-day trading and other market timing schemes. So this is a dicey one. I don't know if any of you out there are into day trading or have stocks on your own. I haven't really gotten much into that, but there are things in here. How this whole thing of if you hear it from somebody and they tell a friend and that third person tells somebody else, everybody is in it. But what if it's something like, oh, this person's about to be arrested because they just had this case where they hit their wife and then that's going to go on and then it's Me Too kind of time. It's going to reflect in a negative way on the company and then that's going to happen. Let's say that doesn't happen, but then let's say it gets to the point where it's actually so gruesome that the person has to sell the company and that changes things. Like, what kind of information is considered insider information and which one isn't? And this is something that can happen a lot when it comes to state officials, when it comes to government officials. Because the government itself, the state, doesn't really do things. It normally, it gets some tender or gets some kind of thing, mandates to do something, and then it outsources it to somebody in the private sector. So, for example, like the recent thing with Kodak, how far do you go from the actual politician to find out? Is it 8 people away, 7 people, 3 people was mentioned here? How far removed from somebody do you have to actually say? Because if it's like, okay, ex-government official is involved in Y committee that is in charge of Z bill to actually push, and they somehow know they've had these people know these things. They kind of talk. They go in and they have their underlings meet up at places and say, "Oh yeah, my senator or my congressman is doing this and this, and they want this and this to happen. What does your person think about this? Oh yeah, we support this. If that bill goes forward, that's actually going to be there. And then once that bill goes forward, they know that hey." When it actually gets to the actual committee, let's say it's a final committee that was actually saying, now that this is okay, we're going to do this. We've released billions of dollars, like $1 billion to actually get this done. It's going to go to these certain companies because people understand when you have something like that, they understand there's certain rules and regulations that a company must meet for it to qualify to actually get certain tenders. So out of the maybe 100 companies that can do this job, they know it's realistically down to maybe 5 or 6 companies that are going to get this whole tender, this $1 billion divided to them in different ways. Now, if somebody knows that weeks ahead, because you know how long these things take, and they tell somebody who tells somebody else who tells somebody else, so this person just a paid and they say, oh, they figure it out themselves, and then they go out and they buy stocks in it, is that insider trading? So it's a difficult thing. Like we know different levels of information about different things, and these gambles and these things that people are done. It's a dicey ground, and it happens. Okay, back to the reading. Detection and deterrence. With a range of crimes and corporate entities involved so wide, corporate fraud draws in perhaps the widest group of partners for investigations. The FBI says it typically coordinates with U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission (SEC), Commodity Futures Trading Commission (CFTC), Financial Industry Regulatory Authority, Internal Revenue Service, Department of Labor, Federal Energy Regulation Commission, and the U.S. Postal Inspection Service, and other regulatory or law enforcement agencies. That's what pretty much every single agency you think of in the United States of America, in most states, tends to, at least I know about this in the United States of America, as we're talking about here, U.S. Postal Inspection Services. They normally have internal security, internal police, and also police that can do things on behalf of them. Because police are enforcement agents of an organization. In general, state police, that's when they say like, oh, there's a state police, there's a county police, there's a town police, there's federal police. These are different levels. They back different things and respond and enforce the laws of different organizations. Because recently there was just this thing with Steve Bannon, who was a former advisor to President Donald J. Trump, and somebody else, I think this was an ex-Marine who was a triple amputee, and they were involved in some sort of regular... You watch it, Viva Frey. Viva Frey is this guy, a YouTuber. Viva Frey and Robert Barnes. They have a really good podcast that I just recently started listening to where they talk about different political things. But there's some things involved where they had this... Not Viva Frey and Robert Barnes. All over the place with this one. Okay, Bannon and this other individual had this charity that was supposed to raise money to build a wall, and they got a certain amount, and they were not supposed to take any of the money whatsoever from that charity to actually pay themselves. 100% of what was donated was supposed to go to the wall. It seemed to have stalled at about $25 million. There was no way they were going to get to the billions actually required and things like this, but it was a thing like that. And now the U.S. Postal Inspection Service, the U.S. Postal Inspection Service, this is why I'm talking about this, were the ones to arrest Bannon. I don't know if they were arresting him on behalf or if they actually have cars and vehicles and policemen with their guns and things like that actually went to his home and arrested him, or if it's something they pass on to whatever local police in that area. But yeah, that's just something I thought was kind of interesting for people to think of, how like the military has its own police. People were somehow surprised at the Department of Education having their own police forces. But yes, even the Department of Education has their own police services. Okay, back to the actual reading. Money laundering. Money laundering is a process of taking cash earned from illicit activities such as drug trafficking and making that cash appear to be earnings from legal business activity. The money from the illicit activity is considered dirty, and the process launders the money to make it look clean. With such cases, of course, the investigation often encompasses not only the laundering itself, but the criminal activity from which the laundered money was derived. Criminals who engage in money laundering derive their proceeds in many ways, including healthcare fraud, human and narcotics trafficking, public corruption, and terrorism. Criminals use a dizzying number of variety of methods to launder money. Among the most common, though, use real estate, precious metals, international trade, and virtual currency such as Bitcoin. I'd like to mention something here with the whole real estate thing. There's some things that seem clearer to see when you see them in a developing nation. Like I'm currently in Kenya right now, and you'll see buildings coming up, just massive construction things coming up in a matter of years. And then it's like, oh, apartments for 20 million shillings a month. And you're like, okay, about 45 million people in Kenya. About half of them still live in that international poverty rate of less than $2 a day. Where are the people? How many people in Kenya, living in Kenya, can literally afford the cost of these apartments? Now, I don't know if it's 20 million selling or if they're doing 2 million a month. Anyway, it's in the millions. The amount of these apartments that I see is a bit it's a bit concerning. It raises question marks. Even during this pandemic, buildings are still going up. Even if it's during like dips and changes in the economy, the buildings still continue. Now I know some of these buildings, like with some of these immediate dips, even if you have that immediate dip, the money was invested in building this thing. It's normally invested ahead of time, so the things are paid for and you just keep going. So there is that aspect. But there is just a general knowledge that people understand in some neighborhoods, in some places where these things are happening, there's a lot of money coming from China, but even before that, there was money coming in, and then you deal with the politicians again, and they're the ones who get a cut for these things, for this money going up, and it's just a mess. But then there's an effect of this that's been happening in the United States of America as well. Chinese politicians tried to launder some money by investing in real estate in the United States of America. I think you see this a lot more in Canada. I think there's a lot more news stories about it happening in Canada. It might be because with Canada, there's fewer actually major cities, so it's Toronto and Vancouver. And you see stories about skyrocketing real estate prices. There's places where, hey, they just build the building and then they don't actually keep the building. Because they understand, if they have the money, getting it in a legal way, they need to launder this money, they need to get it maybe out of China and put it somewhere else. They do a thing where they say, okay, look, we're going to ask you to build this skyscraper for us. And yes, we know the basic cost for this skyscraper, for this 20-story building or whatnot, is going to be, let's say, 1 billion shillings. And then they want to launder 2 billion shillings worth of illegal money from wherever they're getting it from. Those 2 billion shillings, if they kept that money, they wouldn't be able to use it because people are like, where did you get this money from? But they can come to Kenya, they can say, okay, with this company, you build this building for that basic amount of it, and then we will actually pay you 2 billion. You get to keep 100 million with however many people are involved in this scheme. You cut that 100 million, and the rest of it, it comes back to us. We put it in bank accounts in different ways. Maybe we invest in companies. Oh, you use this particular company that they have some shares in, and then that money that's being paid in from this illegal means will be paid back into that company as written down as this is paid for this amount of labor, for this amount of actual resources and things like that. And then that actually goes in to the actual bank as this came in through a legal transaction. So some of these things are happening because some of these buildings being built, some of these mansions you see in some places, I just saw this on this other YouTube channel I just found, they just go to these abandoned buildings. Those people have no intent to actually live in that place to begin with because they're doing it just to launder the money. Okay, so back to this. Okay, so this is the reading. This is money laundering steps. Okay, money laundering steps. There are 3 steps in the money laundering process. Maybe just what I explained already right now is going to be explained here, so excuse that, but let's keep to the reading. According to the FBI, placement, layering, and integration. Placement represents the initial entry of the criminal's proceeds into the financial system. Layering is the most complex step, as it often entails the international movement of funds. Layering separates the criminal's proceeds from their original source and creates a deliberately complex audit trail through a series of financial transactions. Integration occurs when a criminal's proceeds are returned to the criminal who, from what appear to be legitimate sources. Yeah, this is pretty much what I was talking about before. So not all such schemes are necessarily sophisticated. One of the most common laundering schemes, for example, is through a legitimate cash-based business owned by the criminal organization. If the organization owns a restaurant, it may inflate the daily cash receipts to funnel its illegal cash through the restaurant and into the bank. Then they can distribute the funds to owners of the restaurant's bank account. Now, with some of these, I'm kind of wondering, there's some places like you go to New York City and you see these like rent-controlled places where somebody has been working in this bodega or this store, this storefront. There'll be like one of the main, like Lexington Avenue, this small storefront selling these small tchotchkes and little small baubles and souvenir type of things. Like, how are these people affording to pay rent on this location? But they might have tied in some kind of rent payment from 1950s or before, and they're not allowed to change that rent payment. So they're paying very low amounts. But some of these places could be good targets to actually just launder money through. They could just say, there's so many ways to do this because the system is just set up to actually allow these things to go through. I think it seems like it is, because you look at some of these scams and it's not really that, as they mentioned here, some of these things are not necessarily that sophisticated. It doesn't really seem to take the most intelligent people to do these things. Just a bit of effort and they do it. Okay, detection and deterrence. The number of steps involved in money laundering, along with the often global scope of its many financial transactions, makes investigations unusually complex. The FBI says it regularly coordinates on money laundering with federal, state, and local law enforcement agencies, along with a host of international partners. Many companies, especially those involved in finance and banking, have anti-money laundering (AML) rules in place to detect and prevent money laundering. Again with this, I was getting on them before, but still, when you have these systems, people think this is the best way it can be done. When you have a state system that has a monopoly of violence over any given area, you can't just open a different version of the FBI to do the similar things. They say, no, this is an FBI only thing. And the FBI is only so many people are involved in the FBI. Yes, the state has grown, and then when you keep growing and growing, you get more towards a socialist place where it's like, okay, these people being paid by tax money. It's like, is the tax money, can you really tax people who, so much frustration. That's one thing that really gets me. The people who are being paid, their salaries being paid by money taxed away from the market, from the private sector, and then you tax them again. That just makes it makes no sense to me when you do things like this. But anyway, so these systems are set up. Can the FBI really do these things? Let's say there's 1 million people a year doing this. The FBI itself, supposedly the best in the world at doing this, has maybe 10,000 people at most dealing with actually trying to find these things. How many, even if these 10,000 people were just very good at what they did, and whenever you got a group of 10 working on something, in 2 or 3 months, they would find that person and lock that person up and end that thing. How many people will just fall through it because people think these are the only people able to actually handle these things, and because the FBI, as a state agent, will prevent other people from entering these things, entering this field of actually catching and arresting and preventing these crimes from occurring? I don't know. Let me know what you think about that. Okay, back into the reading. Securities and commodities fraud. Apart from corporate fraud noted above, which primarily involves falsifying corporate information and using inside information to self-deal, a host of other crimes involve duping would-be investors and consumers by misrepresenting the information they use to make decisions. The perpetrator of securities fraud can be an individual, such as a stockbroker, or an organization such as a brokerage firm, corporation, or investment bank. Independent individuals might also commit this type of fraud through schemes such as insider trading. Some famous examples of securities fraud are the Enron, Tyco, Adelphia, and WorldCom scandals. Now I'm just asking you this one. People say one thing in order to achieve some profit. Isn't that part of the definition of what politicians say and do? They literally admit to you that there's information they're aware of that they can't tell you. This is iZone. This is national security stuff. Or they say this is classified material. You're not allowed to know about these things. They've come out and said, we literally told you this because we didn't want you to buy masks so that people who we think needed masks more will get the mask. And these people, we still trust these people. And maybe people don't trust them. Maybe that's why some people are as uncomfortable with their lives, because they can't admit that they don't trust them, but at the same point, they kind of know they don't trust them. Okay, back to the reading. Investment fraud. High-yield investment fraud typically involves promises of high rates of return while claiming there is little to no risk. The investments themselves may be in commodities, securities, real estate, and other categories. Ponzi and pyramid schemes typically draw upon the funds furnished by new investors to pay the returns that were promised to the prior investors caught up in the arrangement. Such schemes require the fraudsters to continuously recruit more and more victims to maintain the sham for as long as possible. The schemes typically fail when the demand from existing investors outstrips new funds flowing in from new recruits. Advanced schemes can follow a more subtle, subtle. Why is the B even there? Why don't you just take the B out? Put 2 T's. Put it less subtle. But if you put 2 T's, people would start saying subtle, wouldn't they? Okay, a more subtle strategy where the fraudster convinces their targets to advance them small amounts of money that are promised to result in greater returns. So I'd mentioned that before with the Ponzi scheme things. Yeah, that's they admit even here that that's what it normally comes down. Because in general, who's going to be reporting it? Those first initial people. If you go to any given area, let's say there's 10,000 people in a community that you're targeting for this Ponzi scheme, and only 100 of them might actually be able to fall in for the actual scheme. Chances are it's going to get to a point where there's going to be 50 of those people are already in your scheme. So it's going to get to the point where now there's 50 people only that you can add to that scheme. There's not that whole thing where there's always going to be an exponentially more amount of people out there. You're going to get to that halfway point eventually, and then it's just going to end sooner or later. And then you have some of the people in the scheme, sometimes they come in and they say, okay, yeah, we've invested this money in you, but yeah, you've been giving us our returns, but hey, some emergency has happened in my family. I want to take out this large sum, and then that money's not there because people are constantly just shuffling the money in and out of people who are doing the scheme. So that's another way these things kind of get caught. And those people who are receiving that money for that initial time are not reporting because they're receiving their money. So I understand why they keep going, but I'm also kind of saying that these are not really some super highbrow thing. And in many cases, people are like, that guy was just, he was just such a smart person. I can't believe he did this. I'm like, no, that wasn't really that smart. You're just gullible. People just can be gullible about things. I'm gullible about certain things. I try not to be, which is why I'm reading some things like this, watching a lot of things, asking a lot of questions. Okay, back to the reading. I think we are almost done here. Other financial crimes. Other investment scams flagged by the FBI include promissory note fraud, in which generally short-term debt instruments are issued by little-known or non-existent companies, promising a high rate of return with little to no risk. Commodities fraud is the illegal sale of or purported sale of raw materials or semi-finished goods that are relatively uniform in nature and are sold on an exchange, including gold, pork bellies, and coffee. Often in these frauds, the perpetrators create artificial account statements that reflect purported investments when in reality no such investments have been made. Broker embezzlement schemes involve illicit and unauthorized actions by brokers to steal directly away from their clients, usually with a slew of false documents. Something on this, my parents own some land, and we just found out that there's some people who have gone into the place and putting different beacons out and are selling out some of the land. So you have some of these where some locations have not had as much of a ratification or stratification or systemization of the concept of private property in that sense, where you have these people still going in and other corrupt brokers are going to the actual land and saying, look, this land here is actually land that you can buy from us, and they sell that land to the other people when my parents have already actually owned that land. So going through the process of seeing, is the Ministry of Lands, is the system here in Kenya able to actually go back? So I'll come back and I'll try to remember to mention and just see. I have some frustrations, have the frustrations I have with the FBI and things like that, have the frustrations with the whole systems of state-ran security systems. I have my issues with the United States of America, but compared to what? In many cases, I've found there's a lot of things people complain about in the United States of America that are just unimaginable boons to their society. They just take some of these things for granted. They just don't even realize how beneficial it is to have some of these systems, even with as many flaws as they have, than to not have the systems at all, where it's like a place here where it's going through this process. I shall try to keep you updated, and I hope it turns out well for my folks and the family and things like that. But yeah, so just things are improving everywhere in the world. I think in general there are people in Kenya trying to do their best, trying to improve the things, but there's a lot of people who are benefiting from the lack of the system or just unaware, unable to do some of these things, and that's just an unfortunate thing. But also just a reality of life. Not all beings are created equal. Not all states are created equal. Not all flaws are equally harmful. Okay, so back into the reading. More elaborate yet are market manipulations, so-called pump and dump schemes that are based on artificially inflating the price of lower volume stocks on small over-the-counter markets. The pump involves recruiting unwitting investors through a false or deceptive sales practices, public information, or corporate filings. The FBI says that brokers who are bribed by conspirators then use high-pressure sales tactics to increase the numbers of investors and, as a result, raise the price of the stock. Once their target price is achieved, the perpetrators dump their shares to a huge profit, and leave investors, innocent investors, to foot the bill. And you see, I think this is the part where it goes into into how these things are punished, because of how the crime itself was committed. Is it a crime of force? You know, the whole victimless crime type of situation where if somebody sells somebody else drugs, I don't think that should be illegal because this person is an adult, that other person wanted those drugs, that person took the drugs. Now, if that person takes those drugs and then dies from the drugs, do you sue the person who sold them the drugs? Someone will say, oh yeah, now there is an actual victim. You gave him this drug, but then depends on the drug. When you have a situation where somebody buys alcohol from a bar and then they actually go home and get alcohol poisoning or something, who do you sue? They go home and they drink more alcohol that they bought from the store. And then maybe they work for some kind of institution and they got something directly from the actual brewer. Who of those three people, those three parties, the bar, the store, or the actual brewer of the alcohol, will be technically responsible for selling them that alcohol? But in this situation, it's like, oh no, the transaction happened. The transaction resulted in a death, but it's a legal substance, and this person was of legal age. So technically, even if you advertise to this person that alcohol was a positive thing to help whatever issue that person thought they were dealing with by having that alcohol, you don't hold that person accountable for it. And now they have certain things of, oh, you can only advertise to certain people. You have to put certain disclaimers. Oh, you have to put some warnings and limitations on who can buy these things. So there are these kind of different ways to prevent that. So when it comes to something like this is somebody taking in. If in this kind of thing, this pump and dump thing, you had for somehow actually been convinced to buy it, and then you happened to dump as you saw the price going up. Let's say you had control of your stock, of your shares somehow, and you actually dumped them before or at the same time these people who were in this scheme dropped it. You would also benefit from it. Would you be considered part of the conspirator? No, because you didn't know the information. But if you stayed in this company regardless of it just having this whole situation happen to it, and this company end up being very good in the future after this pump and dump scheme went away, then would you be somehow owing money to these brokers? So there's these kind of difficulties where I can understand why there are some questions of how these people are directly found to be criminal, the kind of sentences they get. But when it comes down to it, it's mostly because this stuff is legal and this other stuff is illegal. The process itself is not necessarily the thing that's being considered harmful. Because if the state does similar things, they're not considered to be doing harmful things. But if you do it when you're not the state, you're considered doing harmful things. Okay, detection and deterrence. Allegations of securities fraud are investigated by the Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, and National Association of Securities Dealers, NASD, often in concert with the FBI. State authorities can also investigate investment scams. In a unique attempt to protect its citizens, for example, the state of Utah established the nation's first online registry for white-collar criminals in 2016. Photos of individuals who are convicted of a fraud-related felony, rated a second degree or higher, are featured on the registry. The state initiated the registry because Ponzi scheme perpetrators tend to target tight-knit cultural and religious groups such as the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints community that's based in Salt Lake City, Utah. And that's it. So yeah, as I mentioned, that's good that there's some people doing some effort to actually get these people's names out there. I've also talked about this in a separate location. I have a separate video. I don't think it's published yet. It might be published by the time you listen to this. But talking about how with some of these scammers, they seem to target religious people. And then people are like, oh, they did such a horrible job. I can't believe they would target the religious community. Oh, this person is a pastor. They're a man with God. Like, I can't believe they... Like, no, I can believe it because you've already shown that you guys believe things that don't necessarily have a preponderance of evidence. There's sometimes where there's actually evidence against it. Sometimes the faith itself is like, faith is what you say when you believe in something without any actual evidence, because you actually had the evidence, you provide the evidence. But in many cases, these people are already shown to be people who will follow charismatic people who tell them that if you do X, Y, Z, you're going to gain in the future. They've already primed themselves and shown themselves to be people that do this. And then it goes in, if you hook one of these people in this community, that whole groupthink type of thing was, oh, well, that person trusts this person, so they must be good, so I'm going to go on this person's word that I consider trustworthy, and then they snag all these people in it. So anyway, that's just what I thought about this thing. This is the general question. What do you think about this? What do you think lies behind the seeming better treatment that white-collar criminals get versus other sorts of crime? What do you think makes it to be a situation where, okay, this white collar criminal should get 25 years because this other person who did X crime gets 25 years? Do you think it's equal? Do you think it's in part because the state does similar things? Where do you think it is on this? Did you know what white collar crime was? Have you been a victim of white collar crime? Have you actually perpetrated white collar crime on somebody? I don't know if you'd admit that. Maybe you're already in jail and you actually served your time and everything. You can actually admit doing something like that. Have you actually gotten close where you're like, oh man, I almost fell into this and like I finally caught myself like, wow. Or why do you think certain people, certain groups seem to fall for these things more than others? Okay, so that's it for now. Like, share, subscribe. Hit me up in the comment section with answers to these questions and just your thoughts. Also, links to a merchandise store wherever this is if you want to help support me. I got some projects coming up. Going to start selling merch separately, working with a close friend on that. Very excited about that. Many exciting things coming in. Not going to be a fraud. We're going to actually try and do something completely true. Okay, till next time. Goodbye.